So now that I have validated all the input that I got from the user, I can actually proceed to, building the user and then saving the user in the database. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna create a new user and I'm gonna say new user, calling the default constructor or the constructor without any parameter. Need to equal here. So then from this point, I can just set all the information that I want. So I'm gonna set the user ID. So set user ID, and that takes a string. And let's say I'm gonna create a function to generate user ID. Okay, so this is gonna be a function that I'm gonna create in a minute. And then after that, I can set the well, actually, let's create a password. So let's do string password, and this is going to be another method that I'm going to create. So let's do generate password, and that's not gonna take anything. And let's create another string. Let's call it encoded password, and this is gonna do encode password, and this is gonna take the raw password. Okay, so I'm gonna pass this password in there so that I can encode it and hash it and then pass it in. So then after that, I can do user set first name, and I can just pass in the first name, and then user set last name, and I'm just gonna pass in the last name. And after that, I can do user set username, and I'm just gonna pass in the username. Oops, username. And then here I can do user set email, and here I pass in the email. And these four values I'm getting from here. So first name, last name, username, email. So I'm just setting those on the user, and then the user set the join date. So I'm gonna pass in the new date, which is the date that the current date that this method is being executed at, the current time. Okay, date and time. And then after that, I can do user let's set password, and that's gonna be the encoded password. Okay, not the raw password, because I'm not gonna save the raw password, which is this password. It's gonna be a simple string. I'm not gonna save that password in the database, and when I'm creating the user like this, that's what's gonna end up in the database. So I want the password of the user not to be plain text. I want that to be encoded. And then I can set the set active, and I'm gonna set this to true, and set not locked. I'm gonna set this to true as well, because they're not locked, they're just creating an account. And now I need to set the authorities or the role, and the role, so set role. And here, as you can see, I don't have any information coming in for that user for the role, so I have to give him some role. In this case, I'm gonna give him the user role. So I'm gonna do role underscore user, and let's see, this is coming from our enumeration, and I'm just gonna call name. Okay, because this takes an actual string, if you remember. I'm gonna call it role. So it takes a string, so we're passing in a string here, which is the actual role name, which is an enum, and then we're converting it into a string by calling the name method. So that's what we're doing here. Put in some static import, and then here I'm also gonna set the user set authorities, and this takes an array, so I can pass in this, and I call get authorities. Okay, and that returns an array. So that's how I'm gonna get all the authorities, and I'm gonna pass them in this setter here. And then after that, I need to set an image for the user. So user set profile image URL. For now, I'm just gonna pass in some random string. Or actually, maybe I'm just gonna create a method called get temporary profile image URL, maybe something like that. And it's not gonna take anything. Okay, so once I get to this point on line 73, I'm gonna go ahead and create this method. It's just gonna return a string that's gonna represent the actual URL for the location of that user image. Okay, so at this point, I think I have everything that I need to set on the user. Let's see, let's go back up. I got this covered. I don't need the last login and the last login did display, because those are going to be null. Okay, those two, they're going to be null as the user is creating their account because they haven't used it yet. Okay, and all right, I set those 4, so I think we should be in good shape. Okay, so at this point, we can go ahead and then call the repository to save the user. So once we get to this point, we set everything that we need to set on the user. We can actually call the user repository, and we call the save method on it, and we pass in the user. Okay, so at this point, the user should be saved on line 74 right here. And let's just put a quick logger. So let's do logger info, and I just want to pass in the password of the user. So let's do user new user password. Okay, because right now I don't have a way to get the password of the user, so I need to have a way to take a look at that if I need to log in to pass in to test it. So I wouldn't know what the password is even if I go to the database, because I'm passing in the encoded or the hashed password. I would never know what this password was at runtime, okay, because it's gonna be lost. So I want to just print it out so that I can see it, and then when I'm testing, I can actually test with it. But at this point, we need to have a way to send some notification to the user using their email. Okay, so this is why we took that email, so that we can send them their new password, which is gonna be not the encoded password this time, but their actual password. Okay, so let's go ahead and create this method. So get user ID and create method, and this is actually it's gonna be very simple. I'm just gonna call the string util and then return some random numeric value in form of a string. So let's do return, and let's call the random I think it's called random string util, and we need a random numeric value, and we're just gonna pass in 10, and that's all we'll need to do here. So this is gonna return some number in form of a string. As you can see, this is returning a string, so it's gonna return a string of numbers that's gonna have a length of 10. That's what this is doing. You can see here into the documentation, that's exactly what it's doing, and it's coming from the library that we put in some previous lectures. Okay, so this is how handy this is all is. So now this is done. Let's create the one to generate the password. So let's go here. Oops, there's the little bubble, create meta signature. And this is gonna do a similar thing. The only difference is, and I'm not gonna return a number, I'm gonna return an actual string. So I'm just gonna do return, and this is gonna be random string util. So I'm just gonna copy it from here. In this case, I'm gonna return some random alphanumeric. So you can have number and letters. So random and alphanumeric right here, and I'm just gonna give it the length of 10. Okay, so it's still gonna be 10, but then it's gonna be letters and numbers. This is only number alpha, as you can see, random numeric. This is numbers and letters. You can see alphanumeric. Okay, so that's what this is doing. And encode password, we'll have to call the password encoder. So we're gonna need to import that. So let's do that right now. So let's scroll up a little bit, and here we need to get the password encoder. So we're gonna do private bc crypt password encoder and password encoder. Okay, so I'm just gonna call it password encoder. This is too long. So we have the password encoder. We also need to pass it in the constructor. So let's do that. And we're just gonna say this password encoder equals password encoder. Okay, so now we have it wired in. We can go ahead and use this encoder to encode our password. So let's go down, and as you can see here, let's create this method, create method. Yep, and what we want to return here is just an encoded password. So we'll just do return, and this is going to be the password encoder that encode, and we pass in the raw password that we took from above. Okay, like that. So we will have the encoded password here, and then lastly we need to get the get temporary profile image URL. So we need to set some URL here that's gonna point to the actual location of a temporary email, since not email, a temporary profile picture, since this is a registration. So we didn't give him an option to actually put in a profile picture. You know, that's a little bit much for just registering. I don't need to put in a profile picture if I'm just registering. Maybe you can, you probably can. Some applications probably do, but in our situation, we're not doing that. That's a little bit too much, you know, asking too much from the user. And then here we're gonna have to set that. We have to set their profile image URL, but this is gonna be temporary. Okay, so that's gonna be like some random generic image that they will look at and say, oh, I need to set up my actual profile image. So that's the intention here. So we're gonna create this method here, and all we have to return is a string. So it could be something like return and then some random string like HTTP, you know, slash blah blah blah. Okay, whatever the location of the actual picture is. So the way we're gonna do this, since I want to get the actual servlet URL, we're just gonna use the servlet URI components builder. So let's do servlet URI components builder, and we're gonna do from current from current context path. So let's do this one, and what we want to do, we want to give it a path. So this is going to return whatever the URL is for the actual server. So for instance, if we're deploying our application on google.com, this whole URL, this whole part of it is going to be slash www.google.com, that part of it. So since our application is going to be running on localhost for testing, so this is going to be something like http ://localhost port 8080. So it's going to be localhost port 8081 actually, and then like this. Okay, so it's going to give us the base URL for that, and then we can add more to it if we want by calling the path on the context. Okay, so what we can do now, and then after we have this path, we can just create an endpoint that takes a get request, and then every time it's fired, it's pointing to some random picture, and you'll see how I'm gonna do this in a second. So here I can pass in a URL. So it can be something like, let's say user /image /profile, and since this is temporary, let's say temp. Okay, something like that, and we just have to turn this into an actual string. Okay, and that should be it. That should be to URI string. So to URI string. Okay, so we will return whatever the base is from here, and then we're gonna add this to it, and then later we can build an endpoint that takes this path to build something. So at this point, we're ready to test this. It's pretty much complete, so we're gonna go ahead and debug it and then test it and then see if we can register a new user.